people are already falsifying their accounts to flatter the Romans and vilify the Jews. You might be interested because of the Marine thing. I actually saw this thing last night on television where the survivors of Wagon went back and visited where they had that terrible battle there at the beginning of World War II. And you know, when I was a kid, I saw this movie called Wagon. You know, and it ended with this heroic thing where all the Marines were firing machine guns while waves of foreign invaders were coming to destroy them. And everyone thought that was the story of Wagon. There had been a heroic resistance at Wagon, but all the guys who were there said, no, the commander of Wagon and the next week surrendered the whole garrison of 1,500 people. And they couldn't believe that he had done this. They had fought very gallantly for around 2 weeks and had staved off foreign invaders. But what we got in America, in Hollywood version of Wagon, was this fight to the death that had been put up by the defenders of Wagon. No, I'm not against that. I mean, the movie makers in Hollywood were trying to fortify the people to resist. This was in 1941, 42, and so on. They made the movie really quickly. But this is what art can do. Art can. I didn't know that they had surrendered. This is, 60 years have gone by in my life. I didn't even know until last night that they had surrendered. So, that's what I mean. Art can dominate your mind until you get history. Art dominates history, always, unless you can get some history that can reshape the art in your mind. So, right away, people, even in his own time, were garbling. Eyewitnesses were being falsified. What's the reason? To flatter the Romans and vilify the Jews. Now, I know you don't like when I say these things. Nobody ever does. And I don't like having to say them. But to my mind, that's what's going on in some of the Gospels in the book of Acts. The vilification of the Jews and the flattery of the Romans. When the Roman centurions accept Christ and recognize Christ before his own people do, when Roman centurions want Peter to come to their house and visit them and give piously to Jewish causes, to me that's all what Josephus is saying here. That is not what went on in Palestine. The Roman centurions from the Caesarean regiments, Josephus makes it quite clear, were the most brutal of all the regiments, and they provoked the Jews to revolt against Rome. So, it's difficult because people have their whole life, faith, everything caught up in this. I apologize to you for having to say those things. But to my mind, and then Josephus himself, you think he's above that? He does the same thing in the end. You have to read, that's how powerful this is. In order to survive in the Roman Empire, you better flatter the Romans or you're on the chopping block, And even he, when he portrays, at one time he has... I think it's Titus coming down, and he meets the resistors. I think there's that story of the 7 brothers. There's an old man who throws his sons off the cliffs, and he begs him. I guess this is Herod. I mentioned it. He begs him to surrender, and so on and so forth. That's just flattery. That's total flattery and vilification. He said Titus always begged the people to surrender before so that he wouldn't have to kill them all, so they wouldn't have to fire the cities, and they always ignored his pleas to surrender. So afterwards he butchered everyone and burned their cities, or sold them all into slavery. I mean, that's just vilification and flattery. And Josephus does it all the time. So that's how difficult. You'll have to think of that in terms of when you evaluate documents here. So for the benefit of the emperor's subjects, I've decided to translate into Greek the books which I wrote some time ago in my native language. So this is maybe written somewhere in the maybe 75, 80, not, I thought it was written around 73, but he says he wrote these some time ago. In his native language for circulation in the Middle East. He means for circulation among the Jews in Mesopotamia and northern Syria. And the reason he wrote it, I think, was to show them that the power of Rome and that they shouldn't make any more trouble for the Romans. And I think he was put up to writing this, by the way. powers that be in the Roman hierarchy and the people who he went over to in the middle of the war. But what language then would he originally written this in? Probably Aramaic. Probably Aramaic. Maybe Hebrew, probably Aramaic. It says he's a Hebrew mind, that may just be a translation by race. I myself, Josephus, son of Matthias, again, we have the Maccabean names, and he says he's a descendant of some branch of the Maccabeans at one point in his autobiography. I am a Hebrew by race. He's also a priest, and a priest from Jerusalem. In the early stages, I fought against the Romans. The later events, I was an unwilling witness. What does it mean he was an unwilling witness? He was a captive, and basically he was an interrogator of prisoners. And one episode, as I think I told you about, when he's sent between the two lines on the siege of Jerusalem so that he can speak to the people on the ramparts. He's trying to get them to surrender, and somehow he's hit by a missile and falls down. And he says, he admits, I think it's in the autobiography, a great cheer went up from the ramparts when they thought their enemy Josephus was dead. So that shows how popular he was in Palestine and how he, what he was doing. He was an interrogator of prisoners and other things, and a propagandist for the Roman general staff, and he saved his life and succeeded extremely well. He lived while all the others died. You know, if you read the Vita, which you should read, it's very short, he goes into the city after it fell, and he asked Titus, the son of Vespasian, if he could have some prisoners who were already up on crosses being crucified because they were friends of his. And Titus gives them to him. He goes and takes down some friends of his from crosses. So don't think Jesus is the only one being crucified in this period. There are literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, being crucified in this period. That's what the Romans did to people that they wanted to make an exemplary punishment. As I told you, it's a forbidden punishment among Jews, and we'll see the Nahum Pesher, the Nahum commentary on the prophet Nahum, actually condemns crucifixion. It says that this furious young lion, who was clearly Alexander Onias, whom I mentioned here, hung people